Good afternoon. This Committee of the Whole is back in order. When we broke, we were on the Mayor's Council, page 142. In Section 1, as a result of what we did earlier in EPA.
Mr. Chair, I have, if I may, I have the proposed amendment to correct that and to balance the budget. You'll notice that should have been passed out by now. I'm assuming all my colleagues have a copy. I go ahead and move it.
Okay, there's an amendment that has been distributed, and on the top it has Senator Estevez' name, and that'll be the amendment to correct this section. Senator Estevez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first amendment is just to address and correct the sum, both numerical and alphanumerical, and that's on line 2, page 142, to amend Chapter 8, Section 1 to read the sum of $8,711,577 is appropriate to the Mayor's Council of Guam for its operations, including personnel services for fiscal year 2018. This sum is comprised of $788,931 from the general fund and $7,922,646 from the Guam Highway Fund, the Limited Gaming Fund, striking out the Recycling Revolving Fund, and the Tourist Attraction Fund. Continues on to read as it currently follows. No more than $8,714,298 shall be expended for personnel object categories 111 to 115.
All right, does anyone wish to be heard on the amendment? Anyone wish to be heard on the amendment? Senator Camacho Torres.
Mr. Speaker, this is an amendment that's intended to just make whole what we did previously. Is this correct?
No, this is to correct these 2 pages as a result of the action that we took yesterday in the EPA section, where we moved $2,100,000 back to EPA.
Okay, so there's really no need for discussion. It's a matter of housekeeping.
Yes, this is the what needs to be done as a result of that.
Right, to which I objected yesterday, but
yes.
The motion passed. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else on this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, as a matter of housekeeping, the second amendment is line 6, page 143 of the bill, to amend Chapter 8, Section 1 to read, under Summary of Appropriation Funding Source, strike out Recycling Revolving Fund at $2,181,296. And then also addressing and updating the total on the bottom.
This is the second amendment. Anyone wish to be heard? Any other amendments you wish to make in this section? Anyone wish to be heard on Section 2, the Limited Gaming Fund?
Mr. Chairman, I'm still on Section 1.
On Section 1.
But this is also with respect to page 145, Section 5, subsection A. On page 145, Section 5, subsection A, it references the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund, but that's not mentioned anywhere in Section 1 as a summary of appropriation funding source.
I'm sorry, where are you at, on 145?
On page 145, section 5, subsection A, it reads, the sum of $481,957 is appropriated from the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund to the MCOG revolving fund for the grounds maintenance of specified schools of the Department of Education in fiscal year 2018. But on section 1, there is no itemization of the TEFF.
You mean the TEFF on page 140? There isn't any mention on page 143.
Yes, there's no mention of it on page 143.
Yes, this is a straight-up appropriation from the territorial, from TEFF. It's not an allocation from within that amount. This one's a completely separate. In addition to...
I'm just curious, I would assume that we would list it as a summary of appropriation funding sources and include it in the grand total if we were going to be itemizing it in a section. I think that's consistent with what we've done, like for other object category, other budget categories. Like for example, in the Department of Education, we specify under the summary of appropriation funding source, we list everything there, and then in the subsequent sections, we appropriate it from what's listed. But under the Mayor's Council, the TEFF is not listed as a summary of appropriation funding source, but we're referencing it in section 5.
It's not part of what the now $8 million lump sum that they have control over, because in section 5 and section 6, there are direct appropriations from the TEFF for various different functions directly.
Yes, but it's not mentioned in section 1.
I understand. And that was because we were making it directly, it was for specific purposes, the ground maintenance and for the public safety education program. We can,
the only reason why I raise it as a concern is because the Department of Education, for example, has constantly struggled to be made whole every fiscal year because the Territorial Education Facilities Fund was constantly short on cash, quote unquote. And this is an example of how we appropriate it to the mayors, and they may receive that $400,000 in section 5 at the expense of DOE receiving their full $4.3 million that they're expecting from the same fund.
when we appropriated for the Guam Department of Education, the discussion the other day was that it was the committee's intent to try to reduce the Guam Department of Education's reliance on the Territorial Education Fund. And so rather than appropriate to them $15 million, we reduced it as much as possible and had the general fund be the main source so that it couldn't be used as the excuse for shorting GDOE.
I understand that, Mr. Chairman. If we look at the history of the GDOE appropriations, they've constantly been short between anywhere from $1 million to up to even $6-7 million. So even this $4 million amount in GDOE that is at 4.3, I mean, technically, if they didn't get any of that, it would still come out to the same kind of situation that they've been suffering from all these years. And so the reason why I wanted to inquire about it with respect to the mayors is we have a $788,000 appropriation from the general fund to the mayors. And I would prefer as much as possible to fund DOE from general fund sources and offset that by rebalancing TEFF from their allocation into wherever we're taking it from. So for example, here for the mayors, I would rather us find a way to take this 788,000 general fund appropriation, add that to DOE, and less it out from DOE's TEF balance. So that just to keep chipping away at how much TEF DOE is relying on. And so the reason why I'm asking why it's not an object category here in
And
section...
trying to get the TEFF to be used for, air quote, educational issues, expenses. We were able to use TEFF here for the mayors because it is to provide ground maintenance for their school and to do something within the school system for public safety. When we were doing the earlier discussion on GDOE, if it was your intention to get them down to zero dependence, we would have to find where we would get the additional money and where that TEFF would be spent otherwise. We moved some to the Department of Public Works because we said buses had something to do with schools. And so that was about as much as we could possibly move around. For the next fiscal year, if we want to get it down to zero, if anybody can help me try to figure out what sounds like education, we could move the money without some of our colleagues saying that was a special fund and we're using it illegally or against the initial intent, we could do that. I'm just saying right now, this is the best way that we are able to fund everything and reduce the TEFF appropriation that was going to GDOE.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions on the mayor's limited gaming fund? Section 3, street maintenance and beautification. Senator Adda?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I noticed that on line 24, it specifically prohibits the use of this funds for personnel costs. So, and Section 3 appropriates $1 million for street maintenance and beautification. So, if they can't pay for personnel to do the work, then I guess that implies that they're going to have to go out and contract all of this. I can see prohibiting the use of the funds for travel, but I don't understand the prohibition against personnel costs.
You can make the amendment to have it struck. It was for all the equipment and things that they're going to need and that amount, but if you're concerned about it not being able to be used for...
So I think that the appropriate amendment would be simply on line 25 to strike out or, no, I'm sorry. On page 24 to strike out, not for, on line 25, strike out personnel costs or, so that the prohibition is just, you cannot use the funds for travel.
Okay.
Okay? So
On page 143,
line 25, remove the three words personnel costs or.
So the only prohibition is travel. Does everybody understand that amendment? Any objection Anyone wish to speak on the amendment or to object to the amendment?
I just want to know if this is existing language from the prior budget? It had that personnel restriction? All right, thanks.
But it did not have the travel one. Any objections? Island-wide beautification projects.
Mr. Chairman, on, we're still on section 3.
Okay.
I wanted to add a new section. I think, first of all, I think on page 144, line 4, that should be a subsection C. Because I think it applies to A and B.
It's the second sentence of subsection B.
No, I think B should be deleted. It's for 2016. I mean, 2019, sorry.
I'm sorry, yeah, there is
but-
no B, so that, yeah.
Beginning with said funds.
So there is no B on 143. Okay, so there is no need for a C there. I did want to add a B, Mr. Chairman, to this section and require an expense report to be filed quarterly with Legislature and Guam, inclusive of the specified road that was improved. This section here is streets maintenance and beautification, and the sum of $1,036,026 is appropriated for the maintenance and beautification of non-routed public roads and for the operations of the mayor's offices, but not for travel. Now, you know, this is technically the priority for this is to fix roads or maintain them, but there is nothing here that actually requires us to be made aware of what roads were improved or maintained with respect to those funds. And so the mayors can go out and hire and say that they're doing it to fix roads, but we have no idea what roads are actually being improved. And so I would like to add a section B to a subsection B to section 3 to require an expense report to be filed quarterly with Legislature and Guam, inclusive of the specified road that was maintained or improved.
Do you have a written amendment, or is that?
I have my little scribble here on my own version here. I can work with the clerk though, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any objection to including a expense report in this section? Thank you. Make sure we clarify that. So are we all fine with 3 now?
May I just comment? On that section, though, that for the expense report, essentially you're asking them to do an itemized expense report on $20,000, right? Because it's an equal distribution amongst the 19 villages of 20,000 each.
It's 20,000 plus the balance based on the mileage of road that they have in their village.
Plus the balance of the mileage. What I'm getting at is whether the amount that they have to report on is really, in our estimate, not a substantial amount of money that would warrant that kind of reporting and itemization. I mean, that's my point. I'm just talking to the reasonableness of having them report on an amount that's really a very small amount of money in the grand scheme of things. So, you know, it's just adding another layer of aggravation where it may not be necessary because the sums are so nominal. And so if we can we just reconsider that? Because I know that if I were in that position, it would seem like too much to ask for such a little effect on the budget overall.
Mr. Chairman, we get requests all the time from constituents in our village asking us when they're going to get their road fixed. we're allocating $1 million to village roads based on a per square mile basis. At the very least, these mayors should be able to report back on where that money was being spent, so that when someone calls up and says, why wasn't my pothole filled, we can say, well, they spent the money on filling the pothole over or around the corner, as opposed to us not being able to account for the funds at all. And given the recent outcome of our hearings where road money was being used for travel rather than for being used to fix the roads, the very least we can do is expect a report to be provided, so that when our constituents ask us why their road isn't getting fixed or why their pothole isn't getting filled, we can account for where the money was actually spent. At this juncture, without the report, we don't know where the money's going.
It's fine. It's in,
I surrender. I mean, I just was talking from a point of being practical, because we know that so long as they're not using it for other than to repair roads, you know, it really is at their discretion to determine the needs, and for us to ascertain whether their judgment was sound or not, you know, might be. I'm just saying it's pushing it, but that's fine. If the body feels it's fine, it's fine.
okay, thank you. 4 island-wide beautification projects. Anyone?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to require a similar report. Again, this is $470,921. It's supposed to be spent for beautification. In our recent oversight hearing, it was determined that beautification money was being spent for travel. And I think it's time for us to be able to, at a village level, when we have these sums being appropriated to the villages, when the people of the village want to know where the money went, the mayor should be able to pull out a report. The mayor's council or our offices should be able to request a report to show that, hey, we appropriated this much, and yet went to go fix those particular items. Right now, there is no requirement for a report as to how this money is being expensed, and so I'd like to add a section into this, a subsection D into this section, to require an expense report to be filed quarterly, inclusive of the specified beautification projects that were funded.
On the request to have a similar reporting requirement to this, Senator Lee?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to ask if we're being required to submit all of our amendments in writing, or if it's...
It was a rule at the beginning that unfortunately has not been complied with for most of the, I'm just trying to get through, and if it's not that difficult an amendment, I will entertain it. But on the reporting requirement in this section,
Mr. Chair, I do agree with the previous speaker that, you know, if we're going to waive us writing our amendments, then I just want to state for the record that if we're going to do that, then we need to consider it for the whole body when someone wants to make an amendment. So I just want to make sure that there's a fair opportunity for everyone.
and if I was to impose it, we would be nowhere, because no one wants to comply with the 5-minute rule or the, you know.
So there's going to be fair opportunity for everyone for their amendments.
You all have been into making amendments without it in writing.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
In this case, Mr. Chair, I think we can be reasonable that if the amendments are comprehensible, that we can just proceed, because there are some amendments clearly that require us to read through it because they're complex. But in cases where it's quite obvious, I would say we can move along. And it also will not only save time, but it'll save on resources, so.
Yeah, and what would, just for this one, on the reporting requirement, do we want to put one for each section, or just one, the mayor's council shall have a a quarterly reporting requirement for all their expenses? I'm just trying to, otherwise we're going to go for each section, and maybe, I'm not making that, I'll go through section by section, but there is a request for a reporting requirement in section 4, and they will work out it'll be all the same way that they write the reporting requirement, all right? For the clerk and legal to make it the same. All right, so there's on the reporting requirement in section 4. Section 5, ground maintenance of schools. Senator Morrison.
Mr. Chair, do you have a information on how much it cost the schools or DOE in the past to take care of these schools? I know it was passed to the mayors a while back, but how much are we really saving here?
How much are we saving?
Right. I just want to know. I mean, I know this responsibility was passed on to maintaining the schools to the mayor's council, and I just wanted to get an idea that if we are in fact just passing on a responsibility, or are we saving money by passing this duty on?
We've been appropriating it for almost a decade. I know that a number of the mayors are complaining that the formula for which they are paid is inequitable, because some of them are saying that some schools have large grass areas but not the same, but the school grounds are larger, and some of them saying it's some schools all concrete, and but if at some point in the upcoming fiscal year someone wants to take this on to try to figure out how to be able to, I'd be willing to address it in the next budget cycle. But right now, this is a way of getting some additional money to the mayors and getting paid for it with the TEFF.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking at these responsibilities, you know, and the Mayor's Council have become mini DPWs. You know, we look at street maintenance, beautification, island-wide village beautification projects, now ground maintenance for schools. I'm just saying, I mean, these are duties that are also built into other agencies, and I'm just wondering if as we push these responsibilities to the Mayor's Council, are we doing this because we're saving money, or are we? So a lot of these responsibilities are mandated in other agencies.
I agree, and if we were going to hold some of the other agencies, we'd close them. So I don't, these are good questions, and in the next budget cycle, when we're going with the oversight chairs, doing oversight, and with the budget hearings, if those questions are raised and we are able to remove that responsibility, please, I'd be willing to entertain it. Because I know that they're complaining that this is not enough. But on this section, as you can see from the next 2 pages with the amount of money that's being paid for the maintenance of the schools, some of them it really is low. All right, on section 5, anybody want to, nothing? Section 5, public safety and social education programs. I'm in section 6. Senator Nicholas?
Just a reporting requirement, subsection there too, Mr. Chairman. Subsection D, reporting requirement, quarterly.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a simple question to ask. Section 6, we're in section 6, right?
Yes.
What do they do with public safety and social education program? What is that referring to? That's not about the school, right? Okay. I beg your pardon? For summer camp? No, I can understand that if it's for summer camp. But, and I will look into the grass cutting on the schools. Just let you know that. I'm asking that question now already. To go back later. Never mind. Nobody.
What? Okay, is there anything else on section 6? It's sports programs for kids, summer programs, evening after school programs for village kids and adults.
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. Just a reporting requirement for section 6.
Okay. Is there anything else on 6 besides adding on a reporting requirement? Section 7, host community premium appropriation. Anything? 7, host community premium appropriations. 8, restriction with the use of special funds for travel.
Mr. Chair, this is a matter of formatting on line 18 of page 148 to strike, comma, the recycling revolving fund.
Okay. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in light of the outcome of our recent oversight hearings with respect to travel, I understand that the purpose of this section is to restrict the use of special funds for travel, but I'm of the mind that at least for this fiscal year, I think there's been enough traveling over the last 6 months, and over the course of the next fiscal year, we should restrict traveling altogether for the mayors until such time that we can get a satisfactory response as to the nature and intent of the travel that the mayors will be undertaking. So I'd like to make an amendment on section 8 and strike the word special. So on line 16 and the title, restriction on use of funds for travel, strike the word special, and then after the word any, strike the word special.
On that, on this Nicholas amendment to strike special funds and just restrict travel completely. Anyone? Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I understand where, I guess, the thinking behind restricting travel completely for our mayors based on the recent oversight hearing that was had. However, I think what we've done here and restricting travel in certain of the funds in the areas where we're appropriating, I think sends a very clear message. You know, I mean, we can't forget as well, Mr. Chair, that these are our fellow elected leaders, and you know, travel it depends on who you talk to. Certain travels are necessary, and someone can explain to us here what types of travels are necessary. Another person can tell us how travel is not necessary at all. However, I think based on the restrictions already placed, I would not support totally eliminating travel completely from the mayor. So I object to that motion.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on this Nicholas amendment? Senator Torres.
I think in light of the fact that we already reduced our budget by $2 million, we should at least give them some flexibility in managing their money. So I object to the deletion of the word special from funds, and because I think to some degree that we have to give them some latitude with whatever they are dealt with in the budget.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Estevez.
Mr. Chair, I just believe if there is going to be a decrease in what's available to them, then I think traveling really should be the last thing on the agenda if there truly is an operational need within there. So I mean, I do have to agree with the amendment.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on the amendment? You wish to close, Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, this, you know, I have a lot of respect for fellow elected officials, but the narrative that we've gotten over the years, to include in this budget cycle, is that the mayors need more funding. They've come back to us every single year saying that they're not getting enough funding for whatever the various needs are in the villages. A common thread that's told to constituents who contact the mayor's office is, oh, we don't have the funds for that. And yet, in light of all of that over the years, it's been discovered that we've had travel taking place by these mayors, and during the oversight hearing, the rationale for the travel was just not something that I could comfortably continue supporting. The idea that we need to go and visit constituents in places outside of Guam, the idea that we need to have mayors trying to serve as ambassadors of Guam to other jurisdictions, the idea that mayors are now trying to use travel to say that they're bringing visitors into Guam when we have a visitors bureau for that. I mean, all of those reasons that were given were just not suitable, at least to me, for us to continue authorizing travel for the mayors. Now, if we restrict the travel and they come back to us next fiscal year and they say, Senators, we understand why you took our travel authorizations away. These are some opportunities that we would like to pursue specifically, and we're asking for you to reauthorize it, then maybe we can have that conversation. But at this juncture, the rationale that was provided does not, to me, lend to good judgment with regard to the expense of public funds for travel purposes by our mayors. The limiting of it to special funds by this section, I think everyone in here really has a true understanding of how budgets work. If you can't use the special funds, you just use the general funds, and then you offset the difference in your general fund with expenditures from your special funds. So I think that at this juncture, it's necessary for us to understand that our community expects us to hold the mayors accountable, and that there has not been any effort to accept accountability with respect to the rationale for travel, and it's necessary at this time for us to restrict it. They even said so. The president of the Mayor's Council himself said, "You don't want us to travel? Take it away." So it behooves us, unless we think that strawberry festivals is a judicious use of public funds, it behooves us to take it away. Until such time that the Mayor's Council can demonstrate that there really is a hardline rationale for us to be spending public dollars on something like that when the needs of their villages are what they are currently. So I ask my colleagues to please support this amendment. I know that the mayors won't be too happy with it, but I can assure you the constituents will be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. He already closed. There's been an objection to the amendment. All those in favor of the Nicholas amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion fails. Section 8, any other amendments? Senator Nicholas.
Reporting requirement subsection on Section 8, Mr. Chairman. Require them to report where they traveled to, the purpose of the travel. They do it internally, but this is to Legislature in Guam.
All right. Get together with council. A reporting requirement here. Do you want it quarterly or monthly?
All the others are quarterly. Quarterly is fine, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Please get together and make sure that we have a reporting requirement provision that is acceptable. All right? Any objection to a reporting requirement? Section 9. Senator Espaldon.
Thank you. Again, just to be consistent with all the other continuing appropriations language, it will be notwithstanding any other provision of law, the allotted but and an unexpended balance of funds. I do have the written amendment. I'll submit it to the clerk.
Thank you.
And the correction actually would be unexpended balance of funds appropriated to the Mayor's Council for fiscal year 2017, because in the section right now, I believe it has 2019.
Yes, we'll correct those.
Right. And it shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully expended.
On the amendment by Senator Espaldon, any objection? Anybody wish to be heard? It's the same amendment that we have with everybody else's continuing appropriations. Okay? We've closed Chapter 8. We're at Chapter 9, Public Accountability Standards and Practices. Office of Public Accountability, Section 1.
Mr. Speaker, if you could just clarify on Section 2, 2016 through 2018, is that what you intended?
Yeah, I was hoping that there would be an amendment to there was a request by the OPA to have authorization to expend whatever she has left over from 16.
Mr. Chair, please correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it the OPA that did say that this continuing appropriations was not good?
You are correct. She has issued an audit report recommending that we stop this practice, but it was their request. I'm If someone wants to move to remove it, I understand. Let's,
But is it
We'll
supposed
take
to
a sh-
say 2017 instead of 2018 with the amendment? Right? That's the automatic change for this? For these continuing appropriations, wherever it says 2018, I think it should say only 2017. Is that right?
that is correct.
Throughout the bill?
Except
Yeah.
for the fact that the OPA did ask for 16, but it's, I know.
No objection, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Nicholas.
as you've stated earlier, Senator Spaldon offered an amendment. It should apply across the board to everybody, whatever it is, you know, that when you want to carry over anything. I would just recommend that we just stick with the same amendment that Senator Spaldon's been
All right,
off.
that's fine. I think he's going to be offering it right now anyway.
Okay,
So I was looking for him to, Senator Espaldon.
Thank you. Yes, again, just to be consistent, and in fact, because she's even asking for 2016, what we've been doing is 2017 and prior, and so the language will basically be the same, I believe, unless you want to restrict it just to 16 and 17. But
I think Senator San Augustine's correct. They should all read the same.
and then my amendment will read the same, notwithstanding other provision of law. That's a new section. The allotted but unexpended balance of funds appropriated to the Office of Public Accountability for fiscal year 2017 and prior shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully expended. And I have that written as well, Mr.
But now,
No, that's the way that he's read for every single one before.
but in this particular case, the OPA has requested to let the 2016 funds.
Yeah, that is a prior year to 17.
Correct.
And rather than listing it as 2016,
It's 17
it's,
and prior.
it's addressed as a prior year, 2017 and prior years.
Oh,
All right,
Yeah.
it's all the same. He's religiously made that amendment for each section. Any objection to Senator Espaldon's continuing appropriation? Thank you. Board of Accountancy. These are their funds and it's their operation. That closes chapter 9, chapter 10,
Mr.
Guam
S- Mr. Speaker, could we dispose of this, or try to dispose of this amendment that's on top of everybody's desk, on the Parks and Rec, page 115? You bypassed that while we were making copies. If you don't mind.
All
I
right.
think it's,
But that was bookmarked, wasn't it? So I believe
Yeah,
when we
it
come
was
back to all the
bookmarked.
bookmarks, maybe that'd be the appropriate time.
We're going to move back to all the bookmarks at the same time. Rather, it's bookmarked, and just remember to bring it up. Let's Guam Visitors Bureau. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I do have an amendment, but before that, of course, I just want to again recognize you and OFB for the work in putting this budget together. I do have to state for the record, though, that although the TAF, the Tourist Attraction Fund, revenue projections were increased, none of that increase went to the Guam Visitors Bureau, and I understand. We got to look at the bigger picture and look at ways to produce a balanced budget. And so, you know, although we've heard from GVB officials of the struggles that a rollover budget, you know, will have for them, I believe that they'll be able to work with what they have, with perhaps some amendments that we can consider. And one of those amendments, Mr. Chair, is, and everyone has a copy of it, it's similar to what we've provided to others. It's a notwithstanding clause, notwithstanding general provisions of sections 3107.1 of chapter 30, Title 11 GCA, and this act, this appropriation shall not lapse, but shall continue to be available. And so that section of the law is the creation of the Tourist Attraction Fund. And what happens, Mr. Chair, is that at the end of the fiscal year, the last day of the fiscal year, funds that are not used or are not provided to GVB revert back to the Tourist Attraction Fund. And so although this fund is one of the most healthiest funds, revenue sources of the government, there are times that the cash is not provided to them before the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th. And so what this would do, Mr. Chair, is allow them to still have claim to those funds. And so, every little resource would help GVB in this coming fiscal year for them to be able to use for their efforts. So I ask my colleagues for their support on this amendment.
All right, there's been a proposed amendment to add 3 lines to the bottom of section 1, first paragraph. Is there any objection to the amendment? Senator Ada.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. If the mover of the amendment can clarify, then I know that there's always been this TAF fund balance, that there's always money in this thing here, and then now we have this the funds shall not lapse. So I was always under the impression that when funds were not expended, it went into this TAF fund balance.
That is correct.
So why do we need a continuing appropriation?
I believe I'll allow him to address it. I have my own theory of what that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding, and please, if OFB can also provide guidance, is that the TF fund balance is for the revenues that come in that we don't appropriate. So that's over and beyond what the projection is. So that goes into the fund balance. And so even in this section, you are appropriating that for their use, the 2017 fund balance. What this amendment, the intent is for the cash that may not be provided to GVB before the end of the fiscal year. We just want to ensure that GVB still does have a claim to those funds, because as it is now in law, is that if it's not provided to GVB, then it reverts back to, I believe, the general fund. Is that correct, OFB? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just a clarification, is that true, that if the funds from TAF, the Tourist Attraction Fund, are not used by the end of the fiscal year, they revert to the general fund?
It's the one, Mr. Chair, it's what is appropriate to GVB, just to GVB. Whatever is not provided to GVB, those revert to the general fund.
Under 30107.1, unused TAF funds, notwithstanding the general provisions of 5 GCA Section 22406, which require that unused and deappropriated funds revert to the general fund, or any other provision of law to the contrary, all deappropriated or unused funds appropriated from the TAF shall, in all circumstances, and whether in whole or in part, be returned to the TAF and not to the general fund. So it's their their TAF fund balance, which, as you remember, in the last year, when the previous chair found that there was an additional amount, found something to appropriate that for, and in this budget, we're actually finding that there is more than what was appropriated in the last budget. and we're appropriating it from the territorial, from that TAF fund balance to make everything balance in this budget. And this provision just allows them to continue to use that, I think, even without our budgetary approval. Oh, just what is appropriated.
And then the rest, just what's appropriate, and
Right.
then the rest goes to the general fund is what's being
It goes
represented
to
here.
no, it goes to the TAF fund balance for us to appropriate separately.
Oh, okay. And the only concern is, at least in my, in my mind, is that we created the rainy day fund, the GVB rainy day fund, at one point, and again, we've been putting the minimal amount into that fund as opposed to really putting away sufficient amount of money into there in case there is an emergency, whether there's a dip in visitor arrivals, because in the past we've seen like the avian flu or certain circumstances, even the airline crash that happened that really necessitated going into an emergency mode to try to attract visitors back in. And my only concern is because we've only been funding that rainy day fund at the very minimal level, again, when it's time to use it, we may not have enough money. And now we're just saying, well, okay, we just minimally fund the rainy day fund and everything else can go ahead and be appropriated and used forever. And I just raised that point because there is a point in time where I think we need to address that and probably take a harder look, especially when we see the increasing numbers of tourism, at perhaps appropriating more to that rainy day fund in cases of emergency when our tourism industry dips for whatever reason. And we have seen the Guam Visitors Bureau actually tap into that rainy day fund when the Japanese visitor arrivals started to dip, and it was not necessarily due to any certain circumstances, but there was just a dip, and they really felt they needed to increase the marketing efforts, to bring that level up from the Japanese side, and they had to access the rainy day fund. So I'm a little concerned about this, but I'm not objecting.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on the Senator Rodriguez amendment to the end of the first paragraph in section 1 as set forth in his written amendment? Anyone? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you said you objection? Oh, I'm sorry. There's been an objection. All those in favor of the Rodriguez amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, oh, I'm sorry. You want to do section 1 first? Go ahead.
Well, anything else on section 1? Section 2. Senator
Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we've been funding this cruise ship industry development program for, I believe, as long as I've been on the legislature.
We're at section, we're the rainy day
we're in
fund.
section 2. I'm sorry. I'll save it. But yeah, again, section 2. Just to reiterate what I said previously, I believe that sooner or later, and I believe I have a bill in that has not been heard yet, that would really recalculate how we fund this rainy day fund, and I think it's important. But at this point, I have no objection to this section.
All right, anybody else? Section 2? Section 3 on the cruise industry. He wanted to speak.
Well, then, as I understand, what just explained to me now, this is a new appropriation, whereas before it used to be the Micronesian cruise, and now we're talking about a GVB cruise ship industry development program. And
I'll have the chair explain it.
well, we've been talking about whether it's a Micronesian cruise or the GVB cruise. It's basically the cruise industry that they've been trying to develop. And I know that you, Mr. Chairman, in particular, amongst others in past legislatures, have supported this, and I can understand. But it seems like it's going nowhere. And even when we talked to the port, when they were talking about their master plan and what they plan to do, there really isn't a berth anywhere there that they're even contemplating at this point of creating for a cruise ship industry here. And so at 50,000 a year over the past several years, and we're not any closer to a cruise ship industry here, I'm just wondering, is this just to send people to Florida to go check out the cruise ship industry forum that they have every year? And if that's the basis for this expenditure, I'm not sure I can favor it.
I'll allow the chair, and then I may have a comment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I do appreciate the statements of the retiring speaker, because I too have felt that same way. However, the investment that the people of Guam have been making, the 50,000, which goes to the Micronesian Cruise Association, really went to a lot of work. You know, besides the travels that that had to be made, they've actually funded a report from PATA that provided recommendations on how you know, Guam and the region really could move forward in the development of the cruise industry. And so this appropriation is a new appropriation. We've worked with OFB in and now, instead of funding membership into the Micronesian Cruise Association, this now would fund a specific committee within GVB to pursue this. We also have legislation that's pending that we're working with GVB to take us to that next level. Because over the years, I think a lot of work, a lot of information has been put together, working with Mr. Jerry Perez, who was you know, very much involved with this. Monty Mesa, the current board member. We're working with the port, Gita, and looking at really taking us to that next level, because this is, in the visitor industry, is really the way that things are going. And so by us now funding a certain program within GVB, I'm very confident that we'll be able to move this forward.
Thank you very much, and for the information of the senators. In previous years, the problem has been that this might have been a project of a couple of us senators without support from GVB. They were not in favor of this. The difference now is there is a board member who is championing this cause and actually sending out emails by the dozen every week on this issue that he's following. And I'm very thankful, because this same board member was the same board member that I chastised as chairman of the Port Authority for not including cruise at the port master plan. So I'm just want to know that they've come full circle, and I think the PATA report has also helped them to see that there may be a glimmer in this industry. Senator Nicholas, and then Senator Adda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too initially viewed this particular appropriation of concern. However, the one thing that makes me very interested in development of the cruise industry is that it will bring in visitors to our community, while at the same time addressing the fact that we're having room issues with respect to the amount of hotel rooms that are available. Because you bring the cruise ship in here, the rooms come with it. And so it's almost a double-barreled investment, in that not only are we going to be able to bring more visitors here, but we're going to be able to bring the rooms along with them. And so I am curious to see how much further we can take this. I would appreciate if we can perhaps be a little bit more appraised of what the investment is going to be returning and perhaps have a timeline developed and a sunset date as to when we're either going to pull the trigger or move on. But at this juncture, because of the room issues and because of the fact that we're kind of getting 2 for 1 in terms of this investment and bringing in more visitors is the aim of these kind of expenditures, I am comfortable seeing this go a little further along. But again, I would like to emphasize that not only with respect to this section, but with all the other sections, if we could be more appraised of the ROI for the investment and be given certain timelines, be given certain expectations as to when we're either going to make a decision or not to continue investing. Those are all things that I think we can do to improve on these sub-items. But the Cruise Association in particular, I think, is something that we should continue to hope and invest in, provided that we're going to be able to get some kind of a basis for the investment and know what the timeline can be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ada?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think just as a matter of principle, I've never really been, I move to delete Section 3.
All right, there's a motion to delete Section 3. Senator, did you wish to speak on your objection or just object? Anybody wish to speak on Section 3? The deletion, Senator Torres?
To the previous motion, there's nothing that would prohibit GVB from investing in the development program of a cruise ship industry, correct? I mean, they can direct marketing dollars there anyways, with or without this appropriation. So I don't know that there's necessarily a harm. There's certainly a gain by identifying it for that specific purpose, but I don't think that there's a harm, and it gives them, if they should not pursue that because there are other pressing needs, that gives them the option. So I just don't see that it could be harmful to delete it.
It's just an indication of the support from here, which is what we were trying to do in the past, but now it's a different one. But yeah, well, marketing can handle that. Yes, you're correct. But all right, anybody else wish to be heard on that? On the add amendment to strike Section 3. Senator Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I object to deleting Section 3, and with respect to what the retiring speaker was mentioning, yes, I think that it would be possible for GVB Marketing to absorb this into their current budget, but I also want to be very clear that over the past few years, we've seen increases in our arrival of tourists and therefore increases in the tourist attraction fund dollars coming into Guam. And unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily mean that the budget for GVB has grown and they've been able to really maximize the use of those funds to manage our destination and to increase their marketing efforts. In fact, many of these TAF appropriations to many different cultural and other organizations have kind of eaten away at that tourist attraction fund money. And so I think if they're asking for this small $50,000 to help to develop this cruise ship industry, that we should support them in that. It's also my understanding that I believe in fiscal year 15, under a previous chairperson of the Guam Visitors Bureau, we actually welcomed around a dozen different cruise ships into Guam, and it really helped to strengthen our numbers at a time when maybe airlift was low. And so I think it's important that we help to diversify a lot of this market. It's really important that we have this really a strong three-legged stool, if you will, of all the different industries that are bringing money into Guam. And so we want to make sure that we diversify our market. We look at many different destinations or people, different countries coming into Guam, but also different opportunities for them to travel here. And so really the cruise industry and the airline industry are only two major ones, and we've invested a great deal in low-cost carriers over the last few years, in addition to some of our flagship carriers. So it would be important to invest just this very small amount of $50,000 to help to bolster their efforts to bring the cruise ship industry here to Guam and really grow it in a way that will be meaningful, I think, for years to come. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to highlight for our colleagues that at the very least, GVB has taken some deliberate steps to articulate their vision in the Tourism 2020 Master Plan. And while we rely primarily on two industries, the military and airbound, actually air passenger inbound tourism markets, I think, like the previous speaker mentioned, it's a small price to pay to explore new markets. In this case, I'm not specifically a fan of the passenger market that they're exploring in this regard, but I think there's something to be said for the visionary aspect of it, like there is for the possibility of a technology market and or a fisheries market, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to highlight that it's specifically outlined here in the Tourism 2020 Strategic Plan for the Guam Visitors Bureau.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other senator wish to be heard? There's a motion to strike Section 3. There's been 2 objections. All those in favor of the motion to strike, please indicate by raising your hand. All those in favor of striking. Motion fails. Section 4.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Section 4. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My comments, Mr. Chair, it's for Section 4 and all other sections in this chapter. Just for the record and to let our colleagues know is that we've been working with your committee, with OFB, in really analyzing and reviewing how we've been doing these pass-through appropriations. Also with the good Vice Speaker, we've been looking at ways to improve how this is done. For the past few years, these pass-through really is to different groups that I guarantee they're doing good work. However, it really sets it up where we're not providing a level playing field for any other organization out there, and being able to provide, whether it's a service, whether it's programs, really it's these different groups that come forward and go to specific senators and ask for these appropriations. And again, I want to just state that it's not to say any of these programs are not valuable and they don't are something that we should continue. However, as I said, we are working with your committee. We are looking, and I know you've already started that. If this was a biannual budget, you've created the Promote Guam Trust Fund. And what that is, Mr. Chair, is that we're working on developing a grant system so that whatever funds that this legislature or the future legislature decides to appropriate for these funds, it goes into a Promote Guam Trust Fund, and that there are strict guidelines that any organizations that would have to apply for to receive these grants. I think it would serve not only the people of Guam right in terms of holding different groups accountable for the money they receive and for the work they do, but also it provides an advantage for these groups because now a lot of them have relied on this annual pass-through appropriations, but as I've talked to them, I said there's going to be a time where it may not be there, and so they need to look at other revenue sources to be able to sustain their programs. And so we're looking forward to being able to put that program in place, working with you, and hopefully for fiscal year 2019 have that in statute so that we could have a program that works for everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator, we are on Section 4, Tourism Education Council. Where are all the pages, please? We're on Section 4, Tourism Education Council. Section 5, Appropriation for the Cultural and Sports Ambassador Fund. Anyone wish to speak or have any objection to it? Section 6, Pa'atatotano.
I just want, there was an amendment that was circulated, it's on the desks, to basically appropriate from the GVB Cultural and Sports Ambassador Fund. So,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, this appropriation, I did not want to affect by my amendment. My amendment, I'm hoping to appropriate money from the fund. They have a balance in this fund according to GVB, and it would only affect that balance, the unused portion.
She's not moving forward with the reduction in the ambassador program. She's going to find another source for her appropriation.
No, the source is going to be the fund. They have a fund. If this appropriation goes into a fund.
The TAF
fund balance.
Fund balance.
Correct.
Which is to be used as part of their operational budget for GVB. So in essence, you're going to be taking money away from GVB.
No, sorry. You're talking about my amendment that I passed out?
Yes.
Yes, that's why I was hoping to take care of this earlier. No. You see, okay, if you look on page...
I've been corrected. At the end of this fiscal year, there will be a fund balance in this cultural ambassador program. And I believe that is what...
It's a special fund, correct.
She is trying...
it would not affect GVB operations nor the current appropriation to that fund.
And is it known how much that balance, would that balance be enough to support this? I mean, we're talking about...
In hers,
we're talking about $290,000.
That's correct.
I have no idea. I'm just trying to get through 6, and wherever she gets hers, when we get to it.
Okay. I just, fine.
On the 200,000 to the Cultural Sports Ambassador Fund. Section 6 to GVB Pa'atatotano.
Mr. Speaker, I would just like to also comment on all these appropriations in this chapter. I agree with the earlier speaker, the GVB chair, or tourism chair, that yes, it's very obvious. I mean, I had not an oversight hearing, just a hearing on what programs were going towards cultural preservation or historic education, language, and so they submitted some reports, but I found that it was not consistent what they had submitted to GVB. GVB was not able to really track how the money was being spent. Even when there were no reports, they were not able to maybe enforce that reporting requirement, things like that. So I would like to help GVB to do that, because I agree that we should give people a fair shot. It should be policy-based, I'm hoping, right? As to, I mean, a lot of these people are our friends, of course, but I would like to see it to more policy-based, more of geared towards what makes, what do we need? Which area needs our help, the government's help or GVB's help, to focus on what makes Guam unique. What parts of Guam do we just need to, boost a little bit? And in particular, of course, our cultural programs, they really do help the visitor industry attract. I'm hoping it's the main attraction. It's the culture. So I do support the inclusion in this bill of a program that going forward would make it more uniform or more, particularly the reporting, Mr. Speaker, the reporting more uniform. They have service requirements to make that more accountable, and so that we all know what is the policy behind each one of these groups. Some of them I had no idea what they were for, what these people did. There's no documentation, I guess, in the last budget as to what they were supposed to do. So that was one of the reasons I had that hearing, so that I could hear also what some of these groups' mission was and what they were going to do. So it's very hard after they're put into the bill to, try to remove them and be seen as, favoring one or the other. I don't favor any of them, but I think as a policy, yes, I favor those programs that are going to promote what makes Guam unique, that Guam's culture, our language, our education programs that will boost that up for all future generations. So I just want to thank the tourism chair for foreseeing a program like that would, and I'm hoping we can get some rules and regs that can assist in managing this program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I do hope that maybe the two of you will co-sponsor legislation creating this trust and having it in place before the next budget cycle starts, so that neither one of you has to address this or any of us have to address the visitations. Okay? Thank you. Senator Torres.
Mr. Chairman, I follow the same train of thought as Senator Terlahi, and what I found very interesting about this budget proposal was the inclusion of Section 29, which contemplated the creation of a GVB Promote Guam Trust Fund, which included that GVB shall prioritize the awarding of the grants and perhaps have the board, the GVB board, a part of that prioritization and authorization. But what I would like to ask at this point is whether it is possible to implement that concept in the 2018 budget, where we would, from beginning on Section 6 through Section 20, through Section 23 perhaps, or Section 24, 25 maybe, that we have the creation of this money so that the sum of all the separate appropriations goes into one fund, and that it will be left to the GVB Board of Directors to prioritize the projects that they deem appropriate at any given time and to approve those grants. Because what I see here is a situation where you could have certain foundations and nonprofit organizations lobbying for a cut of the funds, and maybe they're, given the malleability of tourism and how it fluctuates based on world circumstances, right? Tourism can fluctuate, and there might be a need to respond to a certain situation that changes the order of the day. And we know that, for example, when there are threats to world peace or any situations that arise in the region, they tend to have an effect on tourism. And there is a need, and we've seen this in the past, where there's been a need to respond to certain things, certain crises in the area that warrant GVB's attention. My point is, when you when you appropriate very specific sums of money to particular projects, you then have locked them in and you don't have the flexibility of maybe addressing one or promoting one over another at a particular time based on a need. And that need is something that the board of directors would determine. But is it too late at this point to provide for that in the fiscal year 2018 budget?
I think as it relates to the amounts of money that they're getting, it might be too late, because I know that the good chairman came and spoke to me, and I said, well, but it was May or June. To make a call out for grant applications and have it ready would have been impossible. And that's when he came up with this idea of this trust fund. And my suggestion was to get separate legislation with everything that all three of you have now enunciated about what you want to see in this trust fund, so that it no longer is here, but that they apply someplace else so we don't have to deal with it, or here. Whatever whoever's interested in this wants to do. The one thing that can go in this one is what the Vice Speaker had spoken about earlier, is to make sure that there's a reporting requirement and something. We've put in reporting requirements in new sections. And I think to make sure that in this one there is a reporting requirement, and maybe have it early enough so that anybody who doesn't file a report it will be ineligible for application under the trust. So we know who is willing to comply and who's not. But right now, they've all gone and they've had their hearings, and it's now in the budget. But if you guys would be willing to write a reporting requirement before we get to it, I'd be willing to entertain it in place of Section 29, because I believe that's going to be a completely separate piece of legislation for the creation of that trust.
And I suppose that's the best that we can do in this limited time frame, but I do just want to acknowledge that I sometimes wonder about whether the direction and the mandates are best left for the board to decide fluidly throughout the course of their fiscal year, as opposed to the legislature locking things in stone, and that's my only concern. I mean, for planning purposes it works, but what if it's more our priority and the priorities of those organizations that have lobbied effectively, as opposed to the board of directors and what their mandate might be, in a given year. So that was just my point in wanting to give them more.
I think we can put the ball back in their court if we just write it and get it passed. And I'm encouraging whoever wants to be the...
ahead of the fiscal year, you mean? No.
Yes, like within the next 2 months, so that everybody knows before the end of this year that they'll be applying next January or February, so that the board can review it.
But my point is, once you've allocated this in the fiscal year, it's locked in. You can't.
Yeah, on
take
this group,
from,
yes.
Yeah. Well, I was hoping for that scenario in this fiscal year, because we have situations with world threats that could
and
could
there
affect
have been
things.
in the past when there was no cash, that these NPOs were left
Hanging,
waiting.
right.
So the more that we can get it away from us, I'd be a lot happier, and I think all of you will too in the future.
I agree, and I just wanted to also note that I thought that was a very good Section 29. I truly appreciated that. Thank you.
And Chairman Rodriguez is to be commended for that idea. Okay?
Just to be clear, Mr. Chair, So this whole Section 29, or at least the concept of the Promote Guam Trust Fund, is not going to be a part of this budget at this point, correct?
Correct.
All right.
One, it has an appropriation in it, and two, it also has a, I mean, we've not fleshed out everything that you guys want to have in it. So if we had a biennial budget, what we wanted to do was to send the signal to everybody that there was going to be $790,000 in this trust fund next year, and that's all that was going to be available. Submit your budget request, and they would handle it. Sort of like Americans with Native American ANA or NEA.
Right.
It's there. Congress doesn't do all those. They've given it to an agency to handle and keep it out of their hair, as it were. For those of us that don't have any.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, then please, everyone, just ignore the amendment I just passed out. I didn't realize that section's out of the bill. So that was to amend that section to just highlight that it be Chamorro culture, Chamorro language, Chamorro history, or Chamorro art-related program.
Yeah, I want all of you to get that in.
Yes. I do want to commend the legislature, though, because I know that over the years, GVB has come a long way, and it used to be a struggle to get any GVB money into the community, but now, you know, we can see that it's come a long way, and there's a lot of GVB money in the community supporting our parks, our beautification projects, the mayors, these types of projects, cultural projects. So I just hope, I do see the benefit in the legislature being involved. Thank you, Mr.
Okay. I think we left off on Section 6. Any objection or any amendment? Section 7, Historic and Lawhan Foundation. Any amendment? Pacific War Memorial Foundation, Museum Foundation. Haza Cultural Preservation Foundation.
Mr. Speaker, I would just like to make a motion on line 24 to delete the words Sinaganta Outreach Program and the Ta'adahi Zoltnya Heritage Program, and replace that with the Patehi Litek Zen Save Ritidian Program.
On that, you're replacing two NPOs with two NPOs?
Just one.
With one?
Yep.
Two programs within Hadza.
Correct, Mr. Speaker.
On the, Senator Torres?
So will this then prevent the Hadza Cultural Preservation Foundation from also accommodating these two? Is that what you're doing? You're striking out any
I
possibility?
don't think so. I think whatever Hadza is authorized to do under its foundation, they would be allowed. It's probably not necessary to say inclusive of anything, but
So is it better to just strike
That's
any
possible.
reference? Yeah, I would think that way they...
All right. Yeah, no objection. We'll just strike the inclusive of language, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman, got
Yes.
a question for Senator Lai. By striking that, are they aware they're going to be striked out?
The only reason I'm moving to strike it is because during that hearing and the correspondence that we have received from Hadza, they feel like it's a prohibition against spending it on anything else under their Hadza, which takes care of Amit programs and other types of
Okay.
programs.
Okay, so I think if we just leave it to their articles of incorporation and just strike any specific inclusive of, and it's just Haja Foundation for whatever they're incorporated for. Any objection?
Wait a minute. So then, to be clear, so then we're amending that on line 24 to strike inclusive of all the way to the word program on line 25?
Yes, please.
Correct. And not putting anything else in, just ending the sentence at Preservation Foundation.
Okay.
Section 10, Guam International Film Festival. (11) Humatek Foundation.
What does the Hilmatak Foundation do? What has...
I'll leave to the Humatek boy.
Well, no, I'm just...
No, Senator Castro. They do run a museum at the old FB, Leon Guerrero School. I mean, not FB. Sanchez. But I'll have somebody else explain it.
Mr. Chair, we had with the Vice Speaker a report by the members of the Hamata Community Foundation, and the organization is alive and well. They've been growing in membership from the community since the closure of FQ Sanchez. It's been one of the outlets for many of the youth in our community to take part in a mission to learn how to promote the culture and heritage, specifically in the community, the historic property. When we talk about the museum, you know, the entire community is a museum, not particularly in FQ Sanchez. So, you know, the whole village is an historical area that the members of those, the foundation are docents, and they become very, very familiar of all the historic properties. They educate not only those in the community, but our visitors that take part in the community. They also support our legal holiday, Guam Mystery and Chamorro Heritage Day, and you can see that very well and alive when you come down to the community, not only on that day, but also through the village celebration, San Inicio fiestas. You will see this organization out there alive and well, and ensuring that despite what's been happening in the community with the closure of FQ Sanchez, that we all know is an historical landmark, not only locally but nationally. They've been doing their best to ensure that we don't lose what's very important in the community. I wish I had the brochure, the pamphlet they provided to us to showcase all the projects they've been working on. I definitely ask the members to provide a copy of that. You will see exactly what they've been doing throughout the year. But certainly there's a lot of hope that also with this organization that is partnering with the Mayor's Council to hopefully one day restore the FQ Sanchez, and hopefully one day bring back the educational system back into the community through a charter, possibly a charter program, and through the foundation. So I'll definitely get a brochure to you, Mr. Senator, so you will see exactly what's been happening since the creation of the foundation. And as we know, this foundation was developed as a result of the closure of FQ Sanchez. Thank you.
I just have a question. Can would the foundation be allowed to use some of this money to develop that new field that it got in Umatec for maybe they can use that for cultural dances or whatever?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate you for authoring that legislation to ensure that there's expansion in the area. I certainly think that may be a site for a possibility to expand in that area, but I know that attaches to a very historical landmark called Fua, so maybe that could happen.
Well, and I ask that question in all seriousness, so that if there's any prohibitions in the articles of incorporation or whatnot of the foundation, that you can't use it outside of FQ Sanchez Elementary School or the Heritage Day, then maybe we should provide language that would remove that prohibition. But let's hope that the foundation can use some of those funds to develop that newly acquired field that the village received. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could add, the foundation is a conduit also for these funds to support our legal holiday, Guam Mystery and Chamorro Heritage Day, and one thing we hope, as you seeing it grow again and restore that once and vibrant activity down south, we hope that we can work with GVB, and hopefully one day it will also become a signature event. And not only attract our community, but our visitors from in our region to come and know exactly what this holiday means to us. Thank you.
Senator Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to add to Senator Morrison's comments about the Humatec Foundation. And in addition to all they're accomplishing with cultural preservation, they're very active. They actually have a 5-year strategic plan with respect to environmental stewardship. They also extend beyond the local appropriation, and they've networked with the Coral Reef Conservation Program officials and also the Nature Conservancy in terms of mitigation strategies for corals and other types of environmental opportunities. So I just wanted to add to Senator Morrison's comments about the contributions of the Humatec Foundation, not just towards the preservation of Chamorro language and culture, but in terms of preserving our natural environment and resources, the marine resources in particular. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anything further on Section 11? Huh? Oh, move to adopt. Thank you very much, Senator Adda. Motion by Senator Adda to adopt. Section 12, Amut, Tautautanut Farm. Senator Adda.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, I've had the opportunity to actually go up and visit the Amut Tautautanut Farm, and I think they've done a very impressive job there. And for those of my colleagues who have not taken the opportunity to go and visit, I highly recommend that this is certainly one activity that you should make the time to go and visit. It's something that's very well put together, very impressive, and then they also provide samples of how they produce juices and jams from the very things that they produce there. In fact, if there was any money to be made available, I think this is certainly one of the areas that we should consider giving more funding to. They've done a very excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. On Section 12, Section 13, Hurao. Section 14, Inetnungapago Cultural Arts Program. Section 15, Humanities Guahan. (16) Guam Symphony. (17) Guam Unique Merchandise and Arts, GUMA.
Move to adopt.
18 Duk Duk Goose Incorporated. Senator Ada.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question on, so this program, where it's going into its third year of funding, and I know that this was one of the organizations that didn't show up at the hearing. I think subsequently, though, they submitted a report. But it seems to me that the thinking was to provide funding for these projects to get them started and maybe help to sustain their operations in the second year. But for how long do you continue to subsidize them? You know, I would think that at some point they would have developed a program that would have merited sponsorship to be able to then survive on their own. Otherwise, you know, what we see is pretty much largely once they get in, they're in for the rest of the way, and which may then really keep out other potential projects from coming in and being provided the benefit. So I just want to raise that, and maybe when this trust, whatever this conservation or whatever it is started, that, you know, that's one of the things that they look at is how long are you going to stay on the dole. So I just wanted to express that.
Thank you very much, Senator. It's a very good point. And I'm hoping that the authors will take that into account. So on 18.
Mr. Speaker, on that, yeah. I'm not the author of any of these. And some of these actually have, Duck Duck Goose has been going on, I think, I don't have the report in front of me, but definitely not as long as many of these other programs that are getting significant amounts of money. And I agree, it's a concern that if we continue one forever, no other new programs can come in. But I just think it's unfair to point that one out when that's one of the newer ones compared to some of these, the Pacific War Museum, many, many years, maybe since this program began, and some of these others. So I know Dr. Goose is actually...
I was referring to the author of this new trust legislation that I'm hoping you're all co-sponsoring.
Yeah, they've actually requested an increase, and Cara Flores, who heads this, was off island at the time of that hearing. I just wanted to say that for the record.
Okay. So 18. 19, the Judah Foundation.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I've actually seen the product of the Imanmofotna Lati village poster and books, and it's a very well put together project, and this is certainly something that certainly merits the support of this body. Thank you.
Thank you. On this section,
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move to adopt sections, if it be the will of the body, move to adopt sections 20 through 26.
I was going to make an amendment to section 22.
why don't I know it's tedious, but just in case anybody wants to. Thank you very, very much. I would have loved to have adopted.
We're almost there.
20, TASA. Yes.
And so, you know, I've really struggled with TASA and TASI. I understand it started out, I think, as, I don't know which came first, TASA. And then there was some internal strife and it broke off. And so now you basically have two organizations that are basically doing the same thing, you know, teaching, I guess providing some apprenticeship in how to make canoes, some of the seafaring, and so I'm just concerned that Do we really need two seafaring organizations?
There's actually another one that was included here, section 25, that would be 3.
Oh my gosh, that's a new one. But now we got 3.
No.
I agree, Mr. Speaker, that when it comes to seafaring, there are a lot of challenges, and these individual groups are having some challenges. The seafaring, you know, the whole program has challenges. Some of these they've got some new ideas, and hopefully will rejuvenate, but it's an area that I hope to work on, Mr. Speaker, to consolidate seafaring, to get some kind of standards that you know, we can all agree to going across all of these organizations for Guam, so that we have, I think that the new Commission on Language, Culture, and History, I'm going to ask them to help with that, in that regard, to just help to bolster the seafaring program as it really should be.
Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I totally agree, and that's really the basis of why we're really working very hard to work something out. I know we can't do it we can't put it at least on this budget. However, we're about 70% complete with at least the first draft of this Promote Guam initiative, and perhaps you know, working together with the Vice Speaker and our other colleagues here, if we can get it going, get it introduced and passed, because these appropriations, they're not given at the front end of the fiscal year. These are, you know, they're spread out, and perhaps in working with these groups, we could start. I mean, if we do pass that initiative, in getting some real concrete structure in place, that that there's still hope that we can be able to kind of streamline some of these appropriations even in the middle of the fiscal year.
Senator Castro.
I just want to underscore the sentiments of the Vice Speaker, but I do differ with the retiring Speaker about calling to question the number of seafaring organizations. If we had it our way, probably, you know, I'd like to see a seafaring entity in every coastal village. I think the point, though, if it was made earlier, is that the lack of a rubric or learning outcomes to determine program effectiveness or fiscal accountability is really lacking in most of these organizations. But you know, for the record, if we could put a seafaring entity in every coastal village, then I certainly would support that.
I echo that, Mr. Speaker. I echo that, Mr. Speaker. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. We were on 20 with TASA. We're now on 21 with TASI. '22, Guafi.
Mr. Speaker, I was not part of the prior legislatures that gave this appropriation, and I was not able to get any report, so I'm not familiar with this organization. If anyone is, could you just let me know or share it with us? Oh, yes.
Senator Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year there was a lot of discussion about what this Guafi organization is, and basically what they do is we provide $25,000. They participate in the barbecue down at Pleasure Island in Tumon, and then the winner gets to go off to Kentucky to compete in a national barbecuing competition. Now, quite honestly, I would rather see that $25,000 go to something to further the efforts of that Azuda Foundation for the fine work that they do.
Objection.
You know, let me finish first. So I'm just saying, $25,000 is $25,000 that many organizations certainly could use and to use it otherwise to support a barbecuing, weekend, is just doesn't pass the test for me. Thank you.
Senator Castro?
I agree with Senator Ada. If there could be some discussion, though, on where exactly we're going to put this, but I do agree with striking that particular section and that amount. But if there could be some discussion that Senator Ada can lead, I'd like to talk about it.
There's been a motion to strike.
Mr. Chairman, if I'm correct, Senator Adam mentioned to move that money to the Judah Foundation. Am I correct? Senator Adam, was that?
I would move to delete that and transfer that funding to the Ahmad Farm.
Oh. I agree with that. Thank you.
Senator Lee, on the motion by Senator Ada to strike Section 25 and take that 25,000 to go to Ahmad Farm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have a question. It's my understanding that an informational hearing was heard for all of these different organizations, and I just wanted to know if Guafi Inc. submitted a report to the legislature for the past appropriation of $25,000, or if they had any reporting submitted?
Not to me and not to GVB, to my knowledge.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, I will restate my motion to strike Section 22 and to reallocate those funds to Section 12, the Ahmad Farm.
Mr. Speaker, could we just have a 1-minute recess, please? Or 3 minutes? I'd just like to confer with Senator.
Okay. Madam Vice Speaker, I thought you called for the recess.
Did, okay, thank you for the recess, Mr. Speaker.
Anything else? There is currently on section 22 a motion to delete. Anybody else wish to be heard on sections 22 motion to delete and to move the 25,000 to Ahmad Farms? You're waving your finger at me, Senator Snox.
Yeah,
and you wish
Mr.
to be
Chairman.
recognized.
I'd just like to let it be known that after during our recess, we found out where the Guafi ink is, and just finding out where it was going and what it was for, I'd have to withdraw my support then from the deletion. Even though I want Ahmad Farm to get more money, I would have to withdraw my support on the deletion of Guafi.
Anyone else? On the motion to, and do you wish to close? No. All right. The motion currently on the floor is to delete 22 and move the 25,000 to section 12, the Ahmad Farm. All those in, you're just withdrawing, but there's no objection. There was? Oh, I'm sorry. All right, all those in favor of the amendment to strike 22, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion fails. Section 23, appropriation for the Guam Liberation Day fishing and sporting event. Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I inquired with GVB and could get really no information regarding this. There was, no one showed up to the hearing that I had, informational briefing regarding this event, and the fishermen that I've talked to have not heard of this event either. So I would move to amend section 23, and instead of for the Guam Liberation Day fishing and sporting events, to the Mayor's Council of Guam for annual massacre memorials. These annual memorials that I've been attending right around Liberation Day, they occur, a lot of them are, like the food that they prepare for all the guests is all prepared by volunteers, and I know that the mayors and their staff really go all out. And I know that there are more mayors who we're working with to also get massacre sites in their villages recognized. And I'm hoping we can do more justice than the $35,000 eventually. But for a start, I would just like them to know that there's some money being set aside for those massacre memorials. And I'm saying Mayor's Council of Guam and hoping they would know how to best distribute that or put rules on it.
On the motion, Senator Morrison.
Mr. Chair, I support this amendment. I think we all been out to these events during Liberation Day. I met with the mayors, the families that work very hard on an annual basis to put this together with their own resources, and they have asked in the past for a very minimal amount to keep these events alive, the services, the ceremonies, and I think this is a great amendment to respond to these requests over the years. So I thank the move for amendment for reminding us about these requests, and I hope our colleagues can support this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Atta, and then Senator Estevez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe if the mover of the amendment will clarify, though, because is this for just the Liberation Day related memorial events, or because there's also on Veterans Day and Memorial Day, various villages do conduct, like for example, Umatic, they conduct an event for the veterans at Lalahita Park, Maritzo. Yeah, I believe Maritza on Memorial Day, they do it.
Yes, no.
Yeah, so we need to probably be more specific, otherwise.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I would say to the Mayor's Council of Guam for the annual Chamorro Massacre Memorials.
I think the two of you were talking about two different days. You were talking about Memorial Day. She's talking about Menengan, Siguian, Tinta, Faja, and those other.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Speaker. There's one in Inarajan and Fena.
I understand, but for like on Veterans Day, that's a memorial event also.
That's why I think she was saying.
By saying the massacre.
The Memorial, the massacre, yeah.
Sure.
Okay. On that, anybody else wish to be heard? Senator Castro.
Just a question for the Vice Speaker, ma'am. So we're saying that no one spoke to the Liberation Day fishing and sporting events this past hearing? I mean, I was there, but I don't recall, ma'am.
That's correct. No one spoke to it, and I asked GVB specifically. They've not received any reports. They don't even know who picked the money up. I guess we could follow more thoroughly. They've got to be able to trace that, but they couldn't at the time answer that. And like I said, the fishermen that I've talked to, they haven't heard of this derby.
Okay, with that said, Mr. Chairman, then I'm always reluctant to endorse anything that pulls away from traditional fishing practice and knowledge. And the original intent of that fund when it was created through former Senator Brant McCready was to have families come out and fish, along the coastline, Epau Beach, etc. However, in light of what's been revealed by the Vice Speaker and Chair of the committee, I'm going to go ahead and express my support for striking and moving the money.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair. If I may just, as a point of information, if we look at every one of the other line items, the appropriation is towards either a specific group or a specific fund. So I just want to shed light specifically on Section 23, that is not accountable to, well, I mean, it's there for GVB, but it's not accountable to a specific nonprofit that you would see with some of the other funds. So for consistency's sake.
I think the Vice Speaker's motion was
for the Mayor's Council.
To the Mayor's Council for the specific purpose of underwriting the cost of the
And I want to echo my support for that amendment, but just to shed some light on it, the differences with this language as it is.
Okay. On the Vice Speaker's amended motion for 23, any objection? Senator?
I'm not
Torres.
objecting, but I'd like to propose that we reduce that amount to $25,000 instead, and reserve $10,000 for maybe the omelet farm or for the Inat Pagu. I'm just thinking about the distribution of the money and whether, if we're talking about hosting, $35,000 goes a long way in hosting meriendas, if that was the intention. So before we gavel, I just want to propose that maybe we reconsider whether the amount is too much and whether 10,000 can be more useful to a group such as Inat Pagu, for example.
Well, I'm hoping,
Please.
sorry. Yeah, I understand the prior speaker. However, I've been checking into this, and there are some sites that have not yet been recognized that will require a memorial plaque or monument, something. For example, there's a site in Inarajan and a site in Agate. But for the other sites, like Chagin, it's been set up, it's been recognized by the legislature, and when I ask the mayors how much the volunteers, sometimes they try to cater it or whatever, it's always more than $3,000 each. So I'm counting Fena, Chagin, Tinta Faja, Inarajan, Agate, So I think I would like the money to stay there. I think it's, yeah, I think it's very necessary.
If then, Mr. Speaker, it's for more than just merienda and it also contemplates prepping the site or maybe erecting markers or something, then yes, I would agree that 35,000 isn't all that much. But I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't just for Finette Mammis or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you. On the motion?
Mr.
anybody?
Chair, if I could add to it, based on what the retiring speaker was saying, I mean, if I do support the initiative, however, I am inclined to agree that the 35,000 might be enough. I think that if the appropriation, as was originally discussed in the amendment, if the intent was with the original motion on the amendment was to support the activities, I think that the 35,000 would be a little bit too much. But I think now if they were looking to build these sites, that should actually probably be addressed separately, potentially with a different funding source or a different appropriation, or within the villages as they've done before with community funding. But I think with this fund specifically, the initial intent was to support the activities in commemoration of the massacres leading up towards Liberation Day. So if an amendment's not being made, I'd like to reduce that amount to 25,000. I guess based on what the mover of the amendment had stated, it costs about 3,000 at each of the sites, and we're talking 7 sites currently. At 3,000 would come out to about 21,000, with probably additional 4,000 in support to the Mayor's Council. And with that 10,000, I would like to move that we specifically allocate that to either the Mayors or Guam Veterans Association for the memorials that they do for the veterans on those days to provide support. And while it may seem that this is not necessarily a GVB function, we do get multiple visitors that come in from off island for these memorial events, and I think they can only grow. So the one we have at the Veterans Memorial Cemetery and the ones we see in the different villages draw crowds.
There's a motion to amend the...
Mr. Speaker, with all due respect,
Take a short recess. On the Estevez amendment, anybody wish to be heard?
Mr. Chair, at this time, I'd like to withdraw my amendment.
All right, thank you very much. We're still back on the Terlahi amendment to have the 35 go to assist the mayors in the hosting of the massacre site ceremonies, commemoration ceremonies. Any objection? '24, University Guam Press.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Spaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to propose an amendment, and that would be on line number 18, after the word University of Guam Press, to include the words and shall be used to fund publishing services, author stipends, illustrations, graphic layout, and Chamorro translation services. And that's in line with the explanation that was given to us in our office by the people involved, that's exactly what they want to do, just so there's no misunderstanding of what this is the first time funding for this organization, and that was a justification for the need for this money. So just to make sure that we're in line with the justification for the need of this money, we'll include it in this legislation. I do have it in writing. And again, so the whole thing will read appropriation to the University of Guam Press. The sum of $30,000 is appropriated from the TAF to GVB for the University of Guam Press and shall be used to fund publishing services, author stipends, illustrations, graphic layout, and Chamorro translation services in fiscal year 2018. This appropriation shall not be used for off-island travel.
Thank you very much. With that amendment, anybody wish to be recognized to speak?
Mr. Speaker, I would just like to commend the author of that amendment. I very much appreciate the detail and the accountability in that process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody object to the amendment? Anybody object to the appropriation in 24? None.
Thank you, Mr.
25, Ulitao.
Mr. Chair.
No objection?
I'm just wondering, and it was just brought to light a few minutes ago, this is another seafaring organization. The other ones, TASI and TASA, received $25,000. This appropriation is for $45,000. Just wondering why if this is a new seafaring organization, why are they perhaps getting more than the others?
I'm not, I have no information on that.
Mr. Chair, if I may speak about the Ulitao organization. This organization takes in a lot of at-risk kids, at-risk young men, and teaches them the traditions of seafaring, and also works with the courts to help them perform community service. So this organization, I believe, has a purpose. And I feel that's what is appropriated for them currently should remain.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Mr. Speaker,
Anybody else wish to be heard?
They did submit something in writing that I know I forwarded to the speaker. I'm hoping it's on the messages and communications, but they did have a plan to mirror, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this program in Saipan that just recently launched. They got ANA funding to do I want to call it 500 Sails is the name of the program, and it's a traditional seafaring to build canoes. I think they're building it out of different material, and that's part of the program, so that they can build them faster and get them out in the community quicker, something like. I mean, I don't do justice to it in that summary, but I know that they did submit materials. Those are available. I know I forwarded these.
Anybody else? '26 Micronesian Conservation Trust, 40,000.
Move to adopt.
27 Authority to Transfer.
Mr. Speaker, could you clarify what is the Micronesian Conservation Trust?
As I understand it, the Micronesian Conservation Trust is a organization encompassing the entire area. I think the board members from Guam are Senator Carlotta and Vanji Lujan. They publish I think it's almost a monthly newsletter. At least I get it on my email, where they talk about the move for conservation throughout the area. There's also, they're planning towards each of the island jurisdictions, as I understand it, have made a commitment to some sum of money. I can't remember whether it's $1 million per jurisdiction or 200,000 per jurisdiction, for this trust to work on projects. And this was supposed to be the initial investment by Guam into this trust, if we decide that we're going to move forward with it.
So will this appropriation commit us to that, Mr. Speaker?
No. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, yes, you're right. They do publish these newsletters, but they also have a very useful website. It's ourmicronesia.org. This was also highlighted during the recent Micronesian Island Chief Executive Summit that was held here earlier this year. And you're right, the different islands have committed, and we've committed already, and we just haven't paid up. Guam has committed. I think Guam is the only one that hasn't put any funds up front yet, and so this really is an initial investment into that, initial payment that we would be making, and that we would need to look at moving forward, how to complete the commitment that Guam has made previously.
Anybody else? Any objection? 27, authority to transfer. Section 28, service and reporting requirements. I think this is the reporting requirement that we were all talking about earlier. Is this satisfactory to everybody?
Mr. Speaker, I would make a motion to amend line 18 where it says annual financial reports submitted August 1. Just because of our budget cycle, I, for one, would like to see these earlier than that, so I would ask that these be done quarterly.
Okay, so this section would read, quarterly financial reports and community service hour certification reports shall be submitted to the Guam Visitors Bureau quarterly.
Yes. I know that the money is released monthly. I was going to say monthly, but I guess quarterly is fine.
Quarterly, all right. Okay. Any objection to amending? Senator.
Mr. Chairman, quarterly to GVB, so How about if it's quarterly to GVB and us also? I mean, it's only going to themselves, so just want to
Okay.
make sure it gets to us. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything.
Thank you very much. So the amendment would be the quarterly financial reports to GVB and the Guam Legislature. Senator Morrison? No, Senator Torres?
I'm trying to understand what is meant by a financial report, because as I understand a financial report, generally those annual financial reports are quite extensive. Now, if we're just looking for an expenditure report, I think that that would be a lot more feasible than an actual balance sheet, which is extremely cumbersome to provide quarterly. So I would instead require that there be expenditure reports if that's really your objective.
Okay. So it would be expenditure reports and community service hour certification reports submitted to GVB and the Guam Legislature quarterly. Okay?
It's a lot to ask, but you know, it takes the sting out at least.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Estevez.
If I may, I know the report and the will is that the information comes to the legislature as well, but I do think that the Guam Visitors Bureau, as the administrating authority, really should be the ones to just compile it, and then we get that report from them via our oversight over them. But my only concern is with all these individual line items, then who's gonna try to enforce each and every one of them, ensuring that they're supporting or submitting their reports on time, when really that responsibility falls on GVB, and then our authority is extended through GVB on that oversight. So, I mean, I ask that. I think the information will be readily available for the legislature, regardless, but I think that we just leave the legislature out of it in statute so that GVB will compile the report and provide it to the legislature, instead of us trying to disseminate 20, 30 different financial reports, and when they come in, whether or not they come in. And we'll just let them kind of consolidate that for us.
What's the pleasure of the body?
Mr. Chairman, so in other words, what Senator Estevez wants is what was agreed upon, but let it be GVB to compile the reports, and then when we need it, we'll ask for it? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm recommending. Just so we're not having to sift through and try to compile the 30 different reports from these different agencies. Let GVB do it, because it's their job to administer this money and this funding anyways. And if there are any issues, we contact GVB, because they, instead of kind of micromanaging what GVB is supposed to be doing. I'm sorry. My apologies.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Senator Estevez, but I just wanted to make it very clear that GVB isn't responsible for administering these funds. It's just been the practice that since Tourist Attraction Fund money is, these pass-throughs were created, GVB kind of became the administering authority. So I look forward to working with Senator Rodriguez and other members of this body to create legislation that would create a grant funding program where GVB could administer this money. But I just think that this is Tourist Attraction Fund money that should really be under their purview, but it's just been the practice of this legislature to create these pass-throughs and to help these organizations out. So I think it's just, we need to be very clear that this is not of GVB's creation. This is of the legislature's creation. Thanks.
Thank you. If I may proffer an amendment to read, certification reports shall be submitted and compiled or submitted to the Guam Visitors Bureau to be compiled and submitted to the Guam Legislature.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I believe there's already a motion on the floor right now to address that, and it's the issue of whether or not the report should be submitted to the legislature. And I think we need to dispense with that first and then entertain the next motion.
Okay. We've all agreed on quarterly expenditure and certification of hours to GVB. Now, is there a desire to have those reports come to the legislature? Is there an objection to that? The motion that was made by Senator San Augustine.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
on my motion to go to the legislature, I will withdraw that one, so just go to GVB then.
All right. So it'll read expenditure reports and community service hours certification reports shall be submitted to the Guam Visitors Bureau on a quarterly basis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my amendment is on line 19, shall be submitted to the Guam Visitors Bureau to be compiled and submitted to the legislature.
All right, so the additional amendment is now to add to be compiled and submitted to the Guam legislature. On that amendment, anyone wish to be heard? On that amendment, anyone wish to be heard? Is there an objection to that amendment? None? Anything else on section 28? On section 29, I think Senator Ada?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that the idea of basically placing in the hands of GVB a board to decide who gets these TAF funding, and you know, that decision be made by the GVB board. I do have concerns with that because I believe that board that's going to be reviewing these projects and deciding which project is going to get funding, I think is going to be there's going to be competing objectives here. That new board is going to be basically profit driven. So their motivation for which organization to grant funds to will really be, I believe, be driven by, you know, what's going to really put the wow factor into Tuman for the tourists. Whereas if that decision is made down here, as it always has been in the past, we've always really granted it to organizations that this body believe would promote the preservation of the local culture. And so I believe that those are two competing objectives. And I personally, I would prefer that decision be made by this body. So I just wanted to put that on the record that that's the concern that I have with this Promote Guam Trust Fund.
And whatever happens with the legislation for the Promote Guam Trust Fund, we will make a decision on who makes the final decision. So hopefully that'll be one of the considerations of the authors putting it together. But there is no section 29 because we're not establishing anything right now. Some people are going to write legislation. We will discuss it, deliberate, and determine. And I'm very happy that you said that, because we really do. That they have their own grant program down there, and we wanted to have something here. I was under my chairmanship that it was done, and so, But the thing is that it's got to have some parameters, some regulations, and some end date, as has been brought up. Some sunset on everything. All those things need to be addressed, and so I'm looking forward to it. Who makes the final decision is up to us.
All right, thank you.
When and if it does come. Section 30, the hot surplus. Senator Morrison.
Mr. Chair, I'm just looking at the amount, 705,000. Is that based on the total amounts in 2018 for all these pass-throughs? Because
I don't think I've called in. I was on Section 30, unless I know that there is a Section 30, new Section 30 being circulated. I've not.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Okay, thank
just
you.
a point of information. I think what's confusing everyone is that we have this Section 29, but that was considering this was a biannual budget, right? So if we can just, it's technical,
the
but just
numbering
strike it
will
out. So there's no creation of the Promote Guam Trust Fund at this time.
Right.
so that section is deleted, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And so now we are at what is currently Section 30, where there are some amendments, and if Senator Bisco-Lee, you have an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment would be added to what is now Section 30, which will likely be moved to Section 29, but the hot surplus fund. And so I'll just read what we have in the bill currently. The Guam Visitors Bureau shall be authorized to expend the unappropriated and unexpended hotel occupancy tax surplus fund balance as of September 30th, 2017 for its operations in fiscal year 2018. And my amendment is to add to line 6 of page 159, provided that the first $150,000 of the hot surplus fund balance shall go to the Mayor's Council of Guam for the operations of the 2018 Guam Liberation Carnival. The Executive Director of the Mayor's Council of Guam shall provide to Imegalahan Guahan and the Speaker of the Legislature in Guahan a detailed report of the expenditure of funds allocated in this section within 60 days after the close of the Liberation Day Carnival. So it's my understanding that there was about $1 million in this hotel occupancy tax surplus fund, the balance for last year. And so I'd like for this small portion of that to go to the mayors to assist them with 2018 Guam Liberation Carnival operations. Thank you. And I ask my colleagues for their support.
I'm embarrassed to admit that I was not aware that there was $1 million in the surplus fund, but with your permission, if we could have legal counsel write the first part of this I think if we just adopt that 150,000 or address 150,000 of the hot surplus going to the carnival for next year. And if we adopt that, I'll get legal counsel to write the correct way that should be done. Okay? Is that fine with you? Senator Torres on the Lee amendment.
Mr. Speaker, two thoughts came to mind. One is we haven't established that, in fact, the Mayor's Council of Guam will be in charge of the Liberation Day Carnival. And number two, we don't know what their funding requirements will be. And so my concern is this measure premature at this time during the budget cycle when it can be addressed later in the form of legislation that will also provide for a public hearing that might determine what a true need is, so that we, you know, if in fact the Mayor's Council is going to host it again this year, that we have an understanding of what the needs are, and the legislature has the opportunity to fund them to a level that's sufficient to meet their needs. And so, with all due respect to Senator Bisco-Lee, I'm recommending that maybe in the best interest of the Mayor's Council, we delay this amendment and this appropriation until we have an opportunity to have a council with them and determine what that funding level ought to be, and also confirm that they will in fact be in charge of this year's carnival, or 2018 carnival. So if you know, those are just my thoughts in passing, and I'd like to maybe continue the discussion on that.
Anybody else wish to address that? Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My thoughts on this is we have been presented, there was a presentation made, let me put it that way, there was a presentation made by the Guam Visitors Bureau and the hotel industry, in essence, about a potential bond borrowing that they're looking at to address many other things down in Tumon. If there really is $1 million in there, it would seem to me that we could save by applying whatever's in this bond borrowing, the hotel occupancy tax surplus fund, to take care of some, you know, at least $1 million worth of improvements that the bond borrowing, that at least $1 million from the bond borrowing is going to cover, and use it that way. I mean, because I would imagine that would be perhaps a better way to look at this. But again, I'm just not sure in terms of, you know, of appropriating any more money out of this right now, and I'm not even sure of allowing it to be used for its operations in fiscal year 2018, because like I said, there has been a proposal and a representation that GVB would like to go to the bond market and borrow, and if there was $1 million out there, you could take $1 million off that bond borrowing, and that would be a significant savings in the long term.
Thank you. Senator Morrison.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the mover of this amendment and her attempt to support the carnival event, and I'm just not aware of being a member of the carnival committee, deliberation committee for many years. I've never seen a direct appropriation for this festivity, so I'm not sure. I think maybe what needs to happen to Mr. Chair is in light of what took place prior to the carnival event, I think is planning going forward. We know we see the success of the Chamorro Village and what they've been doing on Wednesday night. I think there have to be some reinventing of this event and see how it could, you know, expand from what happens on a Wednesday night and expand it throughout the summer of during the liberation period. So I appreciate the move of this amendment. I think in light of knowing that there is an opportunity for an organization such as the Chamorro Village and how they've successfully run throughout the year a Wednesday night event. I think it's something that, you know, through a GVB, CAHA, and Mayor's Council can relook how they move forward with the carnival event. But I'm not aware of any appropriation that's ever been made specifically for this activity. I know it's always been self-sustaining through the vendors and those who participate in the event. So I'm just concerned if we're setting some sort of tone for this type of event to be supported in this fashion. And I'm not sure, unless, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chair, if there has been an appropriation made to the carnival specifically.
We've not, but there is a motion on the floor today. So anybody else wish to be heard? We're were those two comments objections or just non-support? Because otherwise,
If, I would pose it as an objection.
okay, thank you. All right, there's been an objection to the amendment. Short recess. We're back on the record. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to, we've received some information about this fund balance, so I'd like to withdraw my amendment at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question. With the information that we received, it's not clear that the numbers match up to the fiscal year 2016 audit. There seems to be conflicting numbers, and I think that we need to take into consideration further investigation on where the money is or where it all went. Because if we're getting a completely significant smaller amount, this money needs to be accounted for.
All right. We're towards the end of this. I'd like to, at this point, recess.
Mr. Speaker, could I please try to do my amendment while it's on their desks and up on top? And it's related to the GVB Cultural and Sports Ambassador Fund, but I was just going to place it into another chapter so that it's clear when anybody looks at historic resources what their mandates are and what they've been authorized to do for that year. It would be on page 116. I beg your indulgence.
Mr. Chairman, I guess the amendment that the senator is talking about is the one that would allocate about $275,000, $290,000 from some fund from TAF for these events here. Now, my understanding has always been that you can put on these riders, provided that they have had a public hearing.
That's correct. What I'd like to do is this. Inasmuch as the information on whether or not there was this money in excess, and if the audit cannot be depended on to give us the correct number for what the hot bond surplus is, what I'd like to do is recess until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, have the chairman of oversight and myself confirm the numbers that we're using or going to be using tomorrow. And I'm going to also ask all of you, please read the provisions tonight so that we can move through it fairly quickly tomorrow. Okay. All right. There's one other one that doesn't require confirmation of how much money is in any accounts, but is a allocation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I would like to proffer an amendment. Just last week, we've had the commercial minister from the U.S. Embassy in Korea visit Guam and give a presentation. And really what that presentation, and that presentation was planned months ago. It wasn't planned because of the current situation with what's happening in the region. But that purpose of that visit to Guam and the presentation to the tourism community was to highlight the growth of the outbound visitors, outbound travelers from Korea, and also highlight the trend that we're seeing in the number of Korean visitors visiting Guam. There's about, in 2016, there was 23 million outbound travelers from Korea, and that has grown from the past 5 years. From that, 2 million of that travel to the United States. And Guam is number one. Guam is number one travel destination. Number two is California, and number three is Hawaii. And so there's very big competition out there in trying to get the Korean visitors to their destination. And so what I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, is make a policy call here in the legislature and reaffirming the amount of $4 million that the Guam Visitors Bureau has proffered to us, and their board has approved, which is spending $4 million in the Korean market. And the reason why we're doing this, Mr. Chair, is that although we did not provide GVB the exact amount of their request for this fiscal year, and we did a rollover, this would ensure that it's a policy call from this body that we want them to pursue this market aggressively. It also supports the position of the two legislative representatives that sit on the board as appointed by the Speaker in terms of ensuring that aggressive marketing is made in the Korean market. Right now, as we speak, not even ending the fiscal year, they have surpassed, numbers have surpassed our number one market, which is the Japan market. We spend over $7 million in the Japan market. I'm not saying we shouldn't spend that much money. We need to maintain that as well. But I think for the next fiscal year, we should affirm and support the initial presentation that $4 million is what should be allocated from their marketing for the Korean visitor market. So I ask my colleagues for their support, Mr. Chair.
And this amendment is not increasing the bottom line of the appropriation at the beginning of the chapter. It is just providing for an allocation of that to be $4 million for the Korean market. Is that correct? Any senator wish to be heard on Senator Ada?
Well, why, I guess my understanding is that we have appropriated for GVB a large sum of money to go and do their promotions work, to bring the tourists to Guam. Why are we the one that's going to say $4 million for the promotion effort for Korea, and then shouldn't that be down at the GVB level? And maybe if the oversight chair can respond to that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, that $4 million, that amount is from GVB. That's during their budget hearing. That's the amount that they had proffered that they would like to set aside and allocate for the Korean market, and that was really considering the 26 or 27 million requests that they had asked for. However, we're not giving them that full amount, and so what this does, Mr. Chairman, is that it reaffirms that position that this allocation should be spent on Korea, and it also now gets them, the board and their management there, to relook at their budget and look at other areas that may have to perhaps be sacrificed. I mean, there's other programs that we've been hearing, and I know there's been talk about some of the concerts and programs that are done locally. So those are some stuff that they will have to realign. But this just reaffirms that position that we need to aggressively go after that market.
Does that address your concern, Senator Ada? Does that address your issue?
Well, he responded to my question, and basically the response was, we're doing the board's job.
Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would have to tend to agree with the previous speaker in terms of that's why there is a board down at Guam Visitors Bureau. We give them a lump sum if they really believe that the focus of their that they need to increase the focus in their marketing efforts in Korea, then that's upon them to make that decision. We know full well that Korea is a major up-and-coming market. We know full well that Japan has been our mainstay for the longest time. But again, that is exactly what the board is supposed to do, and the management is supposed to really do the analysis on that and figure out how much do they really need to be able to move the market to in Korea to come to Guam, and I'm not really sure that's our role. I agree with the good Senator Ada, and I'm not even sure this is necessary. If the board and the management believe $4 million is what they should put into the Korean market, then so be it. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
Senator Torres.
I do believe, though, that the principle behind this new suggestion to have a section put in is the same logic that was used or expressed to me in Section 3 when I asked why you would specify an appropriation for cruise industry development. And the response that I got was that it just demonstrates the legislative body's reinforcement or support for that project. So I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, that since there are some differences of opinion, that we do have a vote on this amendment unless an objection wasn't expressed. Because what this does is it just reaffirms that the legislature would like for the GVB to invest $4 million of its marketing dollars towards Korea. I personally don't know that that's necessary, but if the body feels that in the interest of Guam and tourism, it's important to invest that much money and to have it specified in the budget bill, then, let the body make that directive.
Thank you very much, Senator Torres. Anybody else wish to be heard? Senator Nelson.
Just a question, just to understand this correctly, GVB already has the $4 million focused on the Korean market that we're voting on to show our support.
If we had given them the full appropriation that they had asked for, they were planning on devoting $4 million or allocating $4 million to this, but we did not give them their full appropriation, and I think the oversight chair is wanting to make sure that part of the initial proposal is protected. I hope I answered that correctly. Does anybody else wish to be heard before I have the oversight chair close? Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and that's exactly what the attempt here is to protect what GVB has recognized needs to be expended for this market. And if during the budget presentation, Mr. Speaker, we've heard from them that there are a lot of efforts in trying to get more seats, more carriers to be able to fly from Korea to Guam, and a lot of that are in the works already. And so by signaling and by reaffirming this policy call from here, it just ensures that what is in the works now in being able to bring in more carriers and bring more visitors from Korea is that this is something that that we support from this body as well. So I mean it's a proposal, and there's been an objection, so we can move from there. Thank you.
I believe you're correct that there's been no objection, but there was one senator that, oh, there is. Oh, okay.
Objection.
Okay, so there's been an objection. All those in favor of the allocation proposed by the oversight chair, please indicate by raising your hand. Fails. There was only 7. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Was hoping to. Yes.
Can we just take a 1-minute recess, please?
All right. There is a, we're back on the record. Do I understand you're going to make a motion for reconsideration?
Yes, Mr. Chair, please, motion to reconsider the previous question.
Okay. All those in favor of the reconsideration, please indicate by raising your hand. No, there's 4 on this side, 4 on this, 8. 8. On the motion to allocate the 4 million, all those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. 8. Passes. Thank you. Okay, let's get the confirmation of whatever's left over in all these accounts. All right, and please read the provisions so we can move through those quickly. We have a lot of engrossing, and we have the 31st looming next week. Thank you.